Let's take one last look at your traffic and weather for your ride in on this Monday morning. Do have a couple accidents to report. One's going to be at I-26 westbound with the two right lanes blocked because of a vehicle fire. Another one, Highway 1 near Watling Road, and then I-77 northbound at Garner's Ferry. High today is going to get up to 79 degrees. There is a possibility of severe storms, so be cautious when it comes to that. Tomorrow, 77 with some clouds, and then on Wednesday, high of 82 with the sun peeking back out. That's your traffic and weather on the early game. Nine o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Veltri with you. Final day of March. Another busy weekend. How was your weekend, Jack?
It was fine. I mean, outside of my job, it was fine.
The weather was nice on Saturday. Hopefully you got out and got to enjoy it a little bit.
It was nice in general this weekend. I mean, yesterday was not even too bad, honestly, until the rain started coming down late afternoon. But overall, man, very good weekend, I would say. How was yours? Good?
Not too bad. We were at Carolina Cup on Saturday. Shout out to anybody that came by our booth and said hello. Got to meet some listeners there. I always do this, right? The first, nice weekend where I spend a lot of time outside of the year, I never think about sunscreen.
Yeah, no. I mean, who does, honestly? And it's like, it's a weird time of year to where it's like you don't think you're going to get sunburned, but if you sat in the sun long enough, you definitely are. And
it was cloudy for the most part on Saturday. It was warm, but the sun wasn't beating down on you necessarily. But I'm not red, but when you bump your arm on something and it's a little burnt and you kind of feel it a little bit. That's kind of where I'm at right now. My wife's shoulders are just beet red because she burns more than I do. Because we got out there and I was like, we didn't think about sunblock, right? I was like, we'll be fine. So we're paying for it a little bit, but not it could have been worse. It's wasn't a 90 degrees with no cloud cover type day.
Yeah, just again, it is nice to see the weather starting to really get warm. It's going to be awesome out this weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be a nice weekend.
80s this weekend. Sucks I won't be here to see it, but
Yeah, that's right. You'll be on the road.
Yep, I'll be in Mississippi where it's definitely going to be a little bit cooler and some potentially really bad baseball out there.
Well, it's be your first trip to Mississippi, right?
Yeah, I went to state in January.
That's right.
If you'll remember, for the 35-point beatdown that men's basketball took.
I think we've all just kind of collectively blocked out a lot of men's basketball from this past year.
Yeah, definitely have. But yeah, that was my first trip there, and then this will be my second in the span of 4 months. So,
well, hopefully this one goes better. We'll get into what happened with baseball coming up in a couple minutes, but we got to kick things off the 9 a.m. Sandstorm pick-me-up and then highlight what was a fantastic day for women's basketball yesterday.
Time to get hyped.
Here's your 9 a.m. Sandstorm.
Sponsored by George Sink Injury Lawyers. Just call all nights.
It's time for your 9 a.m. Sandstorm Pick-Me-Up, brought to you by South Carolina's largest injury law firm, George Sink Injury Lawyers. If you've been hurt in the car or at work, call George Sink now at 803-ALL-9s. It was a little squirrely there at times, especially in the middle part of the game and even trailing late in the game. But South Carolina women found a way to win once again, picking up the 54-50 win over Duke in the Elite Eight to punch their ticket to a fifth straight Final Four. I know we are just kind of living in the midst of this dominant dynasty that's happening with women's basketball. But it's still crazy to say something like that out loud. 11 straight Sweet 16s going into the weekend, and now their 5th straight Final Four.
I mean, it's constant consistency with this program. Look, the last 3 games have not necessarily been the prettiest. You've had to scratch and claw in some ways to get these wins, and it's taken a lot of nice efforts in the final quarter to get the job done, and that's exactly what we saw yesterday because South Carolina was trailing to Duke entering the fourth quarter because I believe Duke shot 53% from the field in that third period. But I think the big difference was holding them to about half of that in the fourth period when they're shooting under 25% makes a big difference.
Yeah, no, they physically dominated the fourth quarter, like you said, held Duke 25%. Carolina themselves was 45% from the field. Kits had 8 points in the fourth quarter. Obviously, Sanaya Fagan coming up with some big defensive plays there. Bree Hall as well. Like it was just they locked in. Basically, the back half of the fourth quarter, they locked in, made plays on 82. Chloe Kitts making those clutch free throws to make it a 4-point game late there. Like, they stepped up to the task when they needed to for a game that, again, for the most part, had been kind of shaky and kind of back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, very good effort yesterday. We come to expect this program to do these things that they're doing, winning year after year. And I think, if anything, the season that we've learned is that not every game is going to be a cakewalk. It's not going to be as simple as that. Like, don't get me wrong, South Carolina is still a dominant force out there, but there are other teams that are much more on their playing field now that can go out there and potentially beat them. But at the end of the day, not everyone is South Carolina, and that's what we've seen against Indiana, Maryland, and now Duke. They've really been tested, and they've won all 3 games, and it's going to get tougher. We'll see who South Carolina plays in the Final Four, whether it's TCU or Texas, and then the national championship game, if they get that far, playing UCLA potentially or UConn. We'll see, but it's definitely good to see, I guess, that South Carolina's already battle-tested enough to where they've won these tough games.
Well, and with how dominant this program is, you almost kind of take it for granted getting this far. Like, of course they're supposed to be in the Final Four. Of course they're supposed to be playing for a national championship. But I think this year's tournament really shows you how difficult it is to get to this point. Like you said, down at halftime to Indiana, able to battle back and win that one. Down against Maryland, the other day, and being able to put together a good second half to win that game as close as it was. And then, again, you're really kind of getting outplayed for the middle portion of yesterday's game, and you turned it on at the right time at the very end. Your experienced players stepped up and ended up being the difference in another tight win against Duke yesterday. So you go into this weekend, whether you're playing Texas or TCU, and it's probably going to be another close game. Again, you're very familiar with Texas. You're very familiar with TCU as well, beating both those teams over the course of the regular season. Obviously beat Texas last time you saw them in the SEC women's tournament as well. But, again, it's not an easy road, and women's basketball has become so competitive now when it comes to the teams at the top. It's no longer just 2 or 3 teams that are out there dominating everyone. You have a good mix of 8 to 10 teams that realistically can win this thing, and South Carolina's run through several of them already.
And it makes it much more fun and engaging when that's the case. I mean, South Carolina's gotten the best from every team they've played so far in this tournament, minus the round of 64, because let's be real, you should be able to blow out.
Nobody's going to be talking about the Tennessee Tech game.
No, but the last 3 games, again, they've really had to fight for these ones. And it is good to see that it's not just like, I mean, what fun is it to just blow out teams, right? Isn't it more fun to win in the final seconds and stuff?
Yeah, it is. And I think last year was obviously awesome from the fact that you went undefeated, unblemished to win the national championship. But I feel like, and again, they still got 2 more games to play, so I'm not putting the cart before the horse here. I feel like you can almost, if they win the national championship on Sunday, I feel like you can also almost appreciate a season like this more because you did have more adversity. You did lose to UCLA. You did lose to Texas. You did follow that up and lose to UConn. Like, you've had a lot of questions about this team, a lot of moments of vulnerability. You went into this tournament, and again, now that you're playing these tight games, not without the utmost confidence that they're going to be able to win all these games. Because there's that shred of doubt in the back of your mind that, hey, I've seen them lose before. What if that happens today? I don't know if that does make it more compelling if you're just a fan of South Carolina. I know it does for the general audience watching it because you know that South Carolina is not unbeatable, right? Nobody's unbeatable this year. But I think, again, if they are able to win the next 2 games, you might even appreciate this one more because of how much harder it seemed like it was to get to that point.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think this is a question better posed for the Monday after the national championship, if, of course, they win. Because it doesn't matter if they lose then. But it's like, is this season more difficult than going undefeated? Because, I mean, look, remaining unbeaten the way they had to last year, that's tough to do on its own, let alone having to beat the team that you lost to in the Final Four a year earlier in Iowa and Caitlin Clark, and you were able to beat them this time around. This year, though, I mean, if they can pull this off, it'd be very impressive because they'd have to do it against teams that they've already lost to this year. And the way South Carolina's had to respond against these teams, it's like it hasn't been easy, and they've lost some really tough games, but they're continuing to show that they are, more than capable enough of getting back to this point, even when it didn't seem like they had their best games like they had last year, maybe.
Well, it felt like last year, even before the season started, South Carolina and Iowa were destined to meet each other in the national championship game. If you asked people to fill out a bracket in November of 23, most of them probably would have had those two playing for the title, and that's exactly what happened because it felt like those two teams were just better than everybody else. Yeah, you had the UConns, the LSUs, and all that kind of in the mix, but nobody was quite on the level of what Iowa and South Carolina were doing. This year, it's a different story. And again, you've got great teams. You've got UConn, you've got Texas, you've got UCLA, even Southern Cal without Juju Watkins, that they're all close to each other, right? I don't think there's anybody that's leaps and bounds better than anybody else. Of course, UConn kind of getting the benefit of the doubt, especially for what they did against South Carolina when they played here a couple of months ago or last month, whenever it was. But again, it's really kind of anybody's game. Any of these 4 teams could win the entire thing, and it would be believable.
It would be very, very believable. Again, South Carolina's path is going to remain as if the last 3 games have been tough, then the next 2 could be the toughest that they've had all year, and they come back to back. It's not like you lose to UCLA and then you don't play another. Like, you play tough teams along the way. Yeah. Like, you had TCU mixed in there and stuff.
And that's why Dawn does this.
Yes, it helps.
It does. And I know, a few weeks ago when she was discussing not getting the number 1 overall seed, she did throw out there, hey, maybe we just won't go out there and play those teams. But I think you're so well prepared for a tournament like this when you've already played UCLA. They're still standing. UConn, they're still standing. TCU, they're still standing. Texas, I know they're in conference, but, still, you played them 3 times already. They're still 10. You've literally played all these teams left in the Final Four with the exception of Southern Cal at some point this year. And you've learned a lot from those games because you've lost 2-3 of those teams already. And that's made you better up to this point. And look, I'll take Dawn in a revenge game against anyone. Texas again this weekend, who you've already avenged your loss with. Theoretically, maybe playing UConn in the national championship. If they get that far, if you get that far, I'd still take South Carolina.
Yeah, because if there's anyone that can make adjustments and figure out a way to overcome what happened last time, it's Dawn Staley. And she also has the right staff in place to be able to make the adjustments necessary. Look back at the national championship last year with she gives a lot of credit to Winston Gandy for the game plan defensively that worked so well in stopping Caitlin Clark. And, 2 years ago, Caitlin Clark was lighting the world on fire against South Carolina and stuff. And then last year, they shut her down and they win the national championship. He's a big part of why. So they're going to have the right game plan in place for not just the Final Four, whoever they play, but also the national championship if they get there, because it's going to be tough, man. It's going to be tough, but if they can do it, I do, in some ways, think this would be more impressive than what they did last year.
So they'll get to sit back and watch tonight as Texas and TCU take each other on to determine who will play South Carolina this upcoming weekend in the Final Four on Friday. And then, of course, you got Southern Cal and UConn taking each other on after that to determine the final spot in the women's Final Four this upcoming weekend in Tampa. Men's all chalk, got all the number 1 seeds still standing as they head into their Final Four this weekend as well. What a weekend for baseball, though. Not a good one in a lot of ways. We'll dive into that coming up next. Let's hear from Paul Maneri as well as he dissects another weekend of getting swept in conference play. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry, along with you on your Monday here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Belcher along with you here on your Monday on the game. Baseball. Oh, another tough weekend. You knew coming in, hosting the #1 team, defending national champions, it probably wasn't going to go your way. But when you sit here on Monday morning having to deal with the reality of it once again, doesn't make it taste any better.
It's just... last weekend was worse. Let me just say that. That was super uncompetitive out there in Arkansas. That was as bad as I've ever seen this team play. This weekend, though, I think the moral of the story is you make one mistake against a team like this in Tennessee, you can pay the price, but also you had your opportunities and did not cash in, and that is really what this weekend was all about.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just go to game number 1. Carolina Falls 11-7. You go to the second inning, and runner gets on. First batter reaches with single. Jordan Caron has the opportunity to pull a double play, fumbles with the ball right behind second base, allows a runner on, and they proceed to allow 4 runs after that. Or excuse me,
5.
No, 5 runs after that. That's right, 5 runs after that because they go homer in the first. And, Carolina was able to put runs on the board and mount a comeback of sorts, but you put yourself in such a deep hole at that point in time, and when you have an offense that's struggling like South Carolina's is, that's a big ask for them. And look, Jordan Carrion's done a phenomenal job at the plate this season. Had a really good game that day on Friday night.
Went 4
for 4. But man, that mistake, I don't want to say that one mistake is the reason why you lost the game, but it kind of feels that way.
So when you take away the 5 runs right there, let's say they do turn the double play and then they get the fly out that they got 2 batters later. You, instead of losing 11-7, hypothetically, if the game plays out the rest of the way that it did, you end up winning 7-6. So, in some regards, yes, the error loomed hugely in this game. You can also say McCoy probably. You'd like him to get out of that jam there, right? But it's also like, I mean, come on. It was a double play ball hit right to him. And he's been so good with the glove this year that it's like you almost come to expect Jordan to be able to make that play. And no one, obviously, Paul Maneri was saying it after the game, no one felt worse about that than Jordan himself. And you feel for the guy on that. And it's not just one play that ruined the game. But again, the pitching was pretty good in this game. The offense scored 7 runs on 13 hits. That should be enough to win a baseball game, just like it should have been enough to beat UNC with 8 runs the other day. So it's just when it's like that, it's like, yeah, it kind of looks that way.
And you're right. McCoy, all things considered, a respectable outing. He's only charged with 3 earned runs.
Did not pitch bad.
Didn't pitch bad. Again, the majority of those runs that allowed in the second inning go to that error. He only was credited with allowing the solo homer, and the 2 guys he walked in the top of the 5th, that's the only one that counts against him. So he did a fine enough job. But again, when you're facing a team that's as good as hitting at Tennessee, you're going to have to rely on your defense. And again, it was literally one play, one moment, but that ended up being the catalyst for so much of what went wrong in that game, and you're going to have to keep looking back and pointing that of what could have been. And again, I just think about what it would have meant from a momentum standpoint. If you could have started the weekend off with a win against Tennessee at home, okay, you got 2 games to find at least one more win. Instead of saying, okay, now we got to go out there and find 2 more wins on Saturday and Sunday because you're already behind the 8 ball.
It would have been huge. It would have been massive to be able to get a win in game 1. And I respect the way this team fought. Like, there's no doubt about it. They fought hard to try and win this game. But once again, we've seen it a few times this year. It's either been a late inning disaster or an early inning blunder. When you make one mistake against this type of team, they're going to make you pay.
Well, late inning disaster is what happened on Saturday as South Carolina ends up falling in that one 7-5. And again, you talk about the starting pitching in this, and Jarvis Evans, I think, has established himself as the best pitcher on this team. Can we go ahead and say that? I think we're to the point where I'm comfortable saying that because he went out there and threw a very solid 6 innings, gave up 3 runs. And Brandon Stone, who, again, has moved back into the bullpen after having his struggles starting the past couple weeks, back in the bullpen, which is his primary role where he was doing so well that earned him the opportunity to become a weekend starter on his fourth batter. Gives up the 2-run homer. South Carolina's behind and never gets the lead back.
Let me just say this real quick.
And then it surrenders another one in the ninth inning.
Yeah, he gave up 2 home runs and 4 earned runs on Saturday. And it comes on another point where South Carolina had the lead in the 8th inning. Like, we've seen this story before where they've had the lead in the late going. Oklahoma's a perfect example of that, and you blow it. Now, let me also say this. I think it kind of gets to a point where, like, it's been can we just be honest? It's been a revolving door of changing guys' roles throughout the season. Like Paul Maneri, Terry Rooney, whoever, making the decisions at the end of the day, which is these two. The roles for this pitching staff have just changed so much. It's like they just don't let a guy get comfortable in the role that they've pitched. And for as much blame as we want to pass around to the players and stuff, which of course they deserve some of it, I would imagine, but it's like you're changing a guy's role constantly. And with Stone in particular, he was doing so well in his long relief role that, again, you didn't necessarily need to put him on a Friday night. Like, maybe you put him on a Sunday or something, or just leave him where he's been because he's pitched so well. And then, in turn, let Matthew Becker maybe go out there and kind of figure it out to where it's like, all right, he had the 2 bad starts. But if you let him figure it out, and we'll see what happens, but again, you're flip-flopping everyone in their roles, and it's obviously had some effect as Stone wasn't his best self on Saturday, and we saw him give up 2 home runs.
Then on Sunday, game number 3, South Carolina ends up falling 7-2, and a game where you got hits, but you just couldn't drive guys in, get a couple of RBI singles, but that was pretty much it. It just kind of felt like they just ran out of gas by game 3.
Yeah, and Maneri mentioned something yesterday that he felt there was a lot of scratching and clawing to fight to win the first 2 games, and even before that in other games. Yesterday didn't feel that same way, and I think you can kind of tell. And look, they had no problem getting guys on base yesterday. That was not the issue in the game. The hits kept coming. They had 10 hits, though, and this has been an issue all year for them, only one of those hits went for extra bases. So they don't hit for a lot of power. Heck, they don't even really hit gap to gap much at all. But it's the singles they had that got them on base. And they had a lot of good opportunities. Best opportunity of the game, I think, was the bases loaded, nobody out in the 5th inning, and you get nothing out of it. Chase Woyota strikes out. Kennedy Jones hits into a double play. It's baseball. These things happen. You are going to have situations where you have the best opportunity and you can't come through. But that happened a lot yesterday, where you only had 2 runs yesterday on 10 hits. And meanwhile, Tennessee didn't hit well to start the game. Matthew Becker was phenomenal to start this game. And then the 4th inning, he gets into a little bit of trouble. And I think the biggest mistake yesterday was when he got the 2 strikeouts and then there's a mound visit.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of messes with the momentum, the flow of things. And then another hit's given up, another run scores, and then Maneri comes out and takes him out of the game. That kind of messed things up, I think, to some extent. But then the offense not being able to come through when you needed them to, that's a problem.
So we're a couple weekends into SEC play so far. South Carolina, again, out-hit Tennessee yesterday, but couldn't drive runs in. They are 3rd overall in the league in batting average right now. They are 14th in RBIs and 15th in home runs. That tells you the story of the offense.
Yeah, again, this offense does not have the pop necessary to be one of these elite teams in the SEC. You see teams like Arkansas, and you see Tennessee, you see Georgia. I mean, South Carolina, it's year 1 under Maneri, but it's not that type of team. And I really don't know what this offense's identity is, because it's not like they're spraying the ball over the field for doubles and triples and doing all the stuff that they were doing at the beginning of the year. It's a very different squad, and it's a team that just can't hit consistently.
Yeah, it's frustrating. We'll hear from Maneri what he had to say yesterday and the high level of importance he's placing on tomorrow night's midweek game against Presbyterian, which will be first pitch at 6:30, and you can listen to with pregame coverage starting at 6:15 here on the Game in Columbia, as well as 100.3 the game mounted on Myrtle Beach, because it seems like it's really in do-or-die mode, and we'll let you hear what Maneri had to say about that coming up next. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Feltry, along with you under Monday here on the Game. And welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyred and Jack Belcher along with you here on your Monday on the Game, breaking down a good and bad weekend for Gamecock sports. Bad, of course, being South Carolina baseball as they once again fell, this time at the hands of the number one team in the country and defending national champions in the Tennessee Volunteers, getting swept in all three of those games. They turn their attention to tomorrow night as they take on Presbyterian in the midweek action. Again, first pitch for that coming up at 6:30. And Coach Maneri talked about it after the game. They are treating this game very seriously. In fact, he described it as a Game 7.
So, when we strap it up against Presbyterian on Tuesday, we need to win a baseball game. I hate losing more than anybody, believe me. And it's a very distasteful thing. I don't care if you're playing the Yankees 7 times in a row. Just to lose 7 games in a row is very, it's very discouraging when that happens. Disappointing, not discouraging, disappointing. But the important thing for us is not to get discouraged and go out there on Tuesday and play as well as we can play. We're gonna treat Tuesday like it's the 7th game of the World Series. Whatever it takes to win we need to win a baseball game. Whatever it takes, we're not holding anything back, and we're gonna go out there and play as hard and as well as we possibly can to attempt to win a game. And then after that, we'll turn the page and go to Starkville, and hopefully we'll compete hard there and have some success. We'll see. It's not an easy place to go, despite what their record is. But it's also a little different than having to play these last 2 teams. These 2 teams are well put together, and they play well on the field. So, not that anything's going to be easy, but glad we're done with those 2 teams.
So you're obviously 1-8 in conference play. You're 1-12 versus ranked opponents. Look, Presbyterian's not a team that is ranked, but just to end the 7-game losing skid, like you said, to get the stink off of you for at least one game, regardless of who it is, whether it's like the New York Yankees or a rec league team, like just beating someone and getting that winning feeling back in the locker room, hopefully will do something.
No, you're right. Like, again, they're playing Presbyterian tomorrow night, 7 p.m., SEC Network, and it's a team that, in reality, you should be able to beat, no problem. They're 14-15 on the air, but also you've had your issues with Presbyterian in the past. I think it was last year when they won that. It was like a football score, man. It was like 19-17 or something.
I'm always weary of in-state mid-majors.
Yeah.
They are always tricky.
Now, the comment that the 7th game of the World Series thing. I said this yesterday on my live show. I have no issue with Paul saying that he's going to treat Tuesday like the World Series. That's not the issue. It's the timing of it. That's the problem, because you say it right after you've just got swept and you've lost 7 games in a row. So then it begs the question, I think fans probably feel this way. Okay, so if you're treating Tuesday like the World Series, then did you not treat the other games like the World Series? Like getting swept by Arkansas and Clemson and Tennessee. What did those games mean to you? Like, why are you just now treating it like the World Series, especially when he's a guy that's always focused on one game at a time, not making anything bigger than it is. We're not focusing on Omaha right now, focusing on just, the one team at hand.
I get what he's saying in a way, because I feel like he's implying that you truly have your back up against the wall right now. Not saying you didn't have that going into the weekend or through the course of the 3 games that you lost to Tennessee, but where this game is positioned, again, you're on a 7-game losing streak. You're going on the road to Mississippi State this weekend, who, like you, is 1-8 in conference play, but playing on the road is never easy. You got Texas A&M coming up next weekend, also 1-8 in conference play, but again, playing on the road is not easy. I think he's just kind of implying you just need to win. Just some kind of win. Again, no matter who it's against, you just need to win something to get that feeling back. Yeah. And again, doing that against Tennessee this weekend, even if it was just one game, would have accomplished that to some degree. But now, again, before you go on the road for your longest trip of the entire season so far, you got to have something. And I think that's why he's putting so much on this game tomorrow, as opposed to not saying that going into the weekend necessarily.
Yeah, and look, you should be treating every game like it's the World Series. You play to win the game at the end of the day. You don't play to lose. And look, South Carolina has not had it easy by any means. Let's also, for as bad as the stretch has been, let's also not forget they are 1-12 against ranked opponents.
Yep.
They've had possibly, I think, the toughest stretch to begin SEC play, having to play the top two teams in the country with a midweek game against Charleston and North Carolina mixed in. We knew these were the toughest 8 games of the year, and South Carolina kind of, for lack of a better term, failed miserably. But also, numbers matter and box scores matter at the end of the day. The bigger stats matter. South Carolina looked a lot better this weekend than they did against Arkansas. They were just dominated by Arkansas, 35-9, losing those 3 games. This weekend was a lot more competitive. I will give it that. Much more competitive. South Carolina had the lead at one point in all 3 games, but it's just they couldn't seal the deal in some cases, and they made timely mistakes, as we mentioned earlier. So these are things they got to figure out. The good news is April's a lot more manageable.
It is.
You don't have to play Clemson.
Yeah.
You don't have to play Arkansas. You don't have to play Tennessee. So those are top 5 teams you had to play in the month of March.
You will not face another ranked team until Ole Miss on April 17th.
And that series comes at home.
That's kind of home. That helps.
Think about it, man. Before that, I know you mentioned the 2 road trips here coming up. You go to Mississippi State. That's a team that just got swept by LSU. They're 1-8 as well. I think this is Chris Lemonis's swan song last year there. I keep seeing that fan base ready to let him go. Kind of reminded me of Kingston last year here at Carolina. He's just on borrowed time, I feel like, at this point. So Mississippi State, I think Friday, if they lose, I read it would be their worst start to SEC play in program history. And then you go to A&M. That's going to be a long road trip, but that has been an utter disaster with a roster, probably the most talented roster coming into the year in Aggieland. And I know injuries have happened, but also Michael Early is just not, they're just not cutting it out there
Right.
in College Station. And I think South Carolina very well, if they've looked all right against Tennessee, I think they can go out here and win these next 2 series. And then, heck, who knows what happens against Ole Miss, and then you go to Kentucky after that. You can turn your season around this month, no doubt. But it does start with winning on these midweek games and then going to win these tough weekend series.
I look at this next stretch of games. Of course, we looked at that stretch of College of Charleston through the end of the Tennessee series as a vitally important 8-game stretch. You won the first one against College of Charleston and proceeded to lose the next 7 straight. But this next 8-game stretch is pretty darn important as well, starting with Presbyterian tomorrow and then wrapping up with the end of the A&M series coming up the following Saturday. You got to find a way to win, at least 5, preferably 6, right?
You're talking about the next 2 series here?
The next 2 series and the midweeks against Presbyterian and Upstate, which, again, the weekend series is the more important thing here, but you can't be losing midweek games to mid-majors as well. So, realistically, you got to win 6 games.
So, yeah, you should win the 2 midweek games. That's a given. And then you should be able to win the series against Mississippi State and A&M. And, yes, I know it's tough on the road in the SEC. But, again, these are programs that, I mean, they are very well on the verge of potentially, who knows, firing their coaches. It's just they are in very bad spots right now, and so is South Carolina. But I feel like these programs are in worse spots right now.
If you can't find a way to win either one of these series against scuffling teams on the road,
you're done.
I don't know if you're going to win any series this year, quite frankly.
You are done, DONE, if you do not win these series. Like, you're already in a deep hole at 1-8, but if you can find a way to, ideally you'd like to sweep one of these series, that would really help out a lot. But if you can win 4 of these 6 games, that feels really good. I don't care who it's against. It's the SEC. Every series is tough. You go and win these series, take that into Ole Miss. Who knows, man?
Because at this point, look, the goal is obviously going to be to make the postseason every single year. The thing about being a top 8 seed and hosting all that kind of stuff, that's likely out the window. You just got to find a way to get in. You got to find a way to be one of these 64 teams, even if you're team number 64. And that starts tomorrow, essentially.
If you're not one of the 64 best teams, it's a failure of a season.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
That'd be a tough pill to swallow. And I know anytime you're changing coaching staffs, there's going to be some bumps, but we expected more than this.
Yeah, definitely did. And still a lot of time left in the year. You're at the halfway point now, 29 games down. A lot more to go. but time is ticking to get this season underway, get it really going here. And you need a midweek win tomorrow, and then take that into the weekend.
It is eerily reminiscent of what we dealt with men's basketball and how they did when conference play began. Hopefully it's not going to end up that way, but it's starting to feel that way a little bit. And speaking of men's basketball, we're finally starting to see the 2025-2026 team take form with a couple guys committing out of the transfer portal. With that coming up next, it is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Belcher along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Of course, the entire basketball season getting set to wrap up this weekend with all the Final Fours, men's and women's. Men's Final Four is set. Women's going to be set later on tonight when Southern Cal and UConn play each other. And then Texas and TCU take each other on to punch the final tickets to the Final Four coming up in Tampa. But despite the fact that their season ended a couple weeks ago, men's basketball already very active in the transfer portal, getting a couple of early commitments already in Trayson Eaglestaff from North Dakota and then Christ Esendanko from Providence coming in via the transfer portal. I do think it's interesting, quickly here, a lot of Paris's strategy when it's come to getting guys out of the transfer portal is finding guys that are in-state talents that went elsewhere before, obviously transferring to South Carolina. You have a guy from North Dakota and a guy from France. That's about as far from South Carolina as you can get in terms of your first two portal commitments.
But again, maybe this is the part of realizing that, hey, what I did last year in the portal with your Paris maybe didn't work. And so this is good to see that you're going out here and looking for other options that maybe aren't your in-state guys. You always want to recruit in-state, but it's never a bad idea to go far away from home.
So Trayson Eaglestaff, 6'6" junior out of Bismarck, played for North Dakota this past season, averaged just a tick under 19 points, grabbed a little under 3 rebounds, 2.4 assists per game, and made about 42% of his field goals. Now, he was top 5 in the Summit League this past season when it came to overall points scored, as well as three-pointers, so somebody that's very effective from the outside as well.
Yeah, and this is a guy that the main stat that shows up on the score sheets here, 40 points against Alabama. That's impressive. That's impressive. That's against a team that just lost in the Elite Eight to Duke the other day, and he did it on 15 of 30 shooting, which is insane.
For good measure, in the quarterfinals, of the Summit League championship game, 51 points against South Dakota State.
Yeah.
He was the offense in that game.
So this dude, he's going to take a lot of shots, and that's okay. He can hoop, it seems. So South Carolina definitely got a good score here in Eaglestaff, and I'm very excited to see what you pair him and Eli Ellis up, two guys that definitely require the rock a good bit. What does that look like for this upcoming season? It's a lot of shots that you're going to have to be replacing, so maybe it creates a lot of opportunities there for these guys to show up and make some noise.
Esendanko, 7-foot big man from France, played, fluctuating minutes, I'll say, at Providence this past year. Averaged 4.3 points per game, grabbed about 4 rebounds per game, under an assist, but did shoot 50% from the field when he was taking shots. And just kind of looking here again, he's going to get you, a handful of points, 6'6", 2, 9, 7, nothing crazy, but it's that presence down in the post that's going to be really important for a guy like him.
I think this is more of depth than anything. Like I don't think Esendanko is going to be your day one starter right away unless maybe they just don't get someone else to replace what they're losing. But I will say, go back to what he did at St. Joe's 2 years ago. He shot 36% from the three-point line. So he's capable of obviously shooting from that deep. He obviously didn't shoot particularly well last year from deep, but he also played a lot more minutes, started a lot more for St. Joe's compared to Providence. So that's something to keep an eye on. If he can be a guy that he's a 7-footer, 290, that's impressive if he can shoot that well from three-point range. And maybe he provides you the minutes that maybe like a Jordan Butler had off the bench this year.
Yeah. So Coach Paris already very active in putting together his 2025-2026 team. And as we've talked about many times, it's going to be a vitally important year for the future of this program to make sure things get back on track after a disastrous year number 3.
Yep, a lot of work to do, but I feel like this is a pretty good start in the portal for Carolina.
Absolutely. We'll dive back into women's basketball coming up next as the Extra Point rolls along. Tyler Head, Jack Beltry, Sam Shapiro jumping here with me next on your Monday here on The Game. And welcome back in hour number 2. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head, Sam Shapiro hanging out as he does each and every Monday. As we wrap up your month of March, you know, I can't figure out if March feels like it went by really fast or really slow. Because, like, February goes by quick because it's a short month, only 28 days. And March, especially with how much is in March, sometimes it can go by quickly and sometimes it can go by, it feels like it takes forever. I'm not sure which one this year falls under.
Yeah, the first couple, I feel like the first week of March is usually a little slow just because the basketball action hasn't completely ramped up yet. But I feel like once you get to St. Patrick's Day, it's kind of smooth sailing from there.
Yeah, I completely forgot about St. Patrick's Day this year. It was on a Monday. It's kind of weird. Feels like a month ago now. Maybe it is a long month because that does feel like it was a month ago when it's only been 2 weeks.
Well, like you were saying, it was on a Monday this year, so everyone celebrated on
the weekend before.
Yeah, over on the weekend. But I'm usually off from the station on Mondays.
Yeah.
And I then went and celebrated Monday night because I didn't have to work Tuesday. So
yeah.
It was kind of like a double entendre.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it wasn't as crazy considering most people probably had to get up and go to work or school the next morning on Tuesday anyway.
Yeah. Well, they got an extended celebration. They got Saturday and Sunday instead of just Monday. So
they did. Speaking of celebrations, another celebration in order for South Carolina women's basketball as they're headed to yet another Final Four this upcoming weekend, the 5th straight. And it's almost, it feels like a given, right? Because of how good this program is. They're consistently in the Final Four, consistently playing for national championships. But we've seen, minus the Tennessee Tech game in round number 1, all 3 of these games they've gotten to this point are very tough. Like, any of these games could have gone the other way, and they could have been eliminated in the round of 32, Sweet 16, or Elite 8 yesterday.
Yeah, and I was even just looking back at last year's tournament run. I would personally argue the run they've had this year, they've had a harder kind of path to that Final Four punch in comparison to what they had to take last year, and especially because, they had, they lost pieces like Cardozo I was talking about last week. But, I mean, last year, really the only tough team that I felt like they kind of played before they got to really that our Final Four round against NC State was Indiana. I mean, Presbyterian, North Carolina, and Oregon State didn't really give, the Gamecocks half the fight that I would say either, Indiana again did this year, but Maryland and Duke were much more formidable opponents for this Gamecock team.
And I feel like there's a greater appreciation when you can win games like that. Like last year, you went undefeated and won the national championship and beat perhaps one of the greatest women's basketball players of all time in Caitlin Clark in the process. There's a high level of appreciation for doing that. But when you're already an undefeated team, it gets to the point where it's like, well, yeah, of course they're going to win. This time around, there's that sense of doubt in the back of your mind, like, well, I'm picking them to win. I know they're good enough to win, but if they don't go out there and play their best game, like last year, South Carolina in a lot of games, maybe not necessarily in the tournament, could play a B game and still win. This year, if they play a B game, they could lose, which we've seen them lose to UCLA and UConn and Texas. And again, you're either going to have to go through Texas or TCU this upcoming weekend, and then if you win that game, you're theoretically taking on UCLA or UConn in the national championship. All those teams are capable of beating South Carolina, so they could lose on Friday and not play on Sunday, or they could win both games handily. Like, anything can happen at this point, and again, I feel like you almost created a greater appreciation for winning the national championship if they do that this year, because it seems like it was a tougher road to get there.
Yeah, and it being, I guess, that, giant juggernaut 1 seed, being one of the best teams in the country almost makes it harder to play just because of the pressure you're playing with. I mean, this team has showed time and time again they're beyond talented and, they can make adjustments to kind of make almost anything work. But I think just because of what you were saying, last year when they played a B game, they would still, squeeze out these wins by at least an 8-10 point, margin win. I mean, now we've kind of seen where 1 or 2 quarters has completely, shot them in the foot almost. And those, I think, that was maybe the case in those 3 losses we saw during the regular season. But just because of how still few and far they are in between, I think that's also why, especially these last 2 matchups, people have been a little bit more nervous, even though, these are high-stakes games and these are talented teams. So I'm not completely surprised that they were close, but because of how talented, the Gamecocks have been this season and last season, I mean, that definitely instills a little bit of fear and maybe a little bit of doubt creeps in.
And when you have a team like this that has been there and done that before, this senior graduating class has not known a season without a Final Four. They played a ton of tournament games. They won national championships, SEC tournaments, all that kind of stuff. The moment is never truly too big for them. And with that, you create a lot of good leaders within your locker room that when, you're in a tight game, when it's coming down to the wire against a very good team like Duke, you have those player leaders that step up and make everybody else around them play to their highest level. And Dawn Staley talked about that after the game yesterday, the value of being a player-led team like South Carolina is.
I mean, super important. You're hearing from young people who have dealt with things in real time. So I'm not surprised, but I'm proud because they have great self-talk. They have great talk amongst each other. They want each other to do well. They want to win. So it's all communication that's helpful in those moments. Now, we're probably communicating something else, and they're balancing us with that kind of talk, especially out of a timeout. They'll walk on the floor, and they're just talking to each other through what needs to happen. That is a team and players that have played with each other a long time, and the teams and players that have done life skill sessions together, team that's done, the practices and the breakdown. Like, we got the best video coordinator ever. Real time. They want to see where they made a mistake in practice, and we'll walk over and we'll look at it and we'll say, hey, and then they'll say, hey, I was out of place, I was wrong, or it looks like I was right this time. So it's great that we can have those things, impact actually real time, game time, and we're in those situations.
You have so much experience on this team, and yesterday Dawn Staley put all the chips in their hand to play the back half of that fourth quarter where they really locked in. Again, Kits had 8 points, made 4 of those from the free throw line, including 2 clutch free throws at the very end that made it the 4-point game that it ended up being. You had Sanaya Fagan, you had Raven Johnson generating some steals. You just had an all-around, Bree Hall grabbed 3 rebounds just in the fourth quarter alone. Same thing with Sanaya Fagan. They went out there, and when it really counted, because, again, the middle part of that game did not go their way. Duke outplayed them through the middle portion of that game. When it really counted at the very end, your best, your most experienced players stepped up and won that game for you.
Yeah, it was definitely a sweaty third quarter, but I think another thing that I kind of overlooked personally just with this game was, because of how South Carolina just made more of their shots instead of Duke. We were talking earlier how Duke's defense, definitely separated them in this lineup. They were winning games in the regular season by, I think, a 15, 16-point margin. But then when you look at this game from yesterday, South Carolina shot exponentially, 43% from the field, 37% from 3. And this isn't even a three-point shooting team that we've seen recently. Versus you look at Duke, they shot 31% from the field, 29% from 3. If they had shot a little bit better at all, they could have honestly ran away with the game, even despite the good fourth quarter.
Well, and a game like that comes down to a handful of plays, a handful of shots going one way or the other. And again, Carolina made them when they needed to at the very end and ended up winning. And one thing to me as well, and it shows how deep this team is when 2 of your best players didn't really do a whole lot yesterday and you still found a way to win. That's huge. Joyce Edwards is the team's leading scorer. She had 4 points yesterday off 2 of 7 from the field. Malaysia Fawali, who, by the way, went off for 23 against Maryland the other day, and that win was the big reason why you won that game, had 5. So her and Joyce Edwards combined for less than 10 points in the game yesterday, and you still won. Because, again, 95% of teams around the country, if 2 of their best players at that level didn't show up, they're not winning that game. Carolina can.
Mm-hmm. And they're both very flexible players that I know Fawali's kind of been coming off the bench as of more recently, and she's kind of a starter caliber player. And Joyce Edwards also, leading the team in points. But, Joyce Edwards is also very young. She's been, she's played at a high level before, playing in the Junior Olympics, even with Chloe Kitts.
Yep.
But I think that, this is her first national tournament. It's a different feel. It's a different stage. It's something new. And I think she is just getting used to playing in an environment like that, with a team like Carolina. So I definitely think that's, maybe playing into getting shaking off some maybe first tourney jitters. But I think this is going to, depending on how this run pans out, I think it's going to at least set the framework for her to come back either sophomore, junior year and, ball out. But
well, I was saying again, with how deep this team is, Joyce Edwards doesn't have to go out there and be superwoman every single game, and you can still win. She's averaging 5 points a game in the last 3 contests. So she had 4 against Duke, 6 against Maryland, and 5 against Indiana, which, again, the leading scorer, they're going to key on her. They're going to try and take her away, which they've done a pretty good job at that. I'm going to be interested to see, especially now with a couple days of practice and rest and all that kind of stuff, what she looks like on Friday against either Texas or TCU. And if she can kind of take a step back in the right direction, because again, you're kind of seeing the lights of the tournament be something that she's still kind of getting used to. And again, she's got a lot of basketball to play here at South Carolina for many years to come. So I'm not worried about this, but it is significant to see that she hasn't done as much in these past 3 games. 3 games that South Carolina has had to really sweat out.
Yeah, and I think, it could just be those 3 teams, really watching film around her, seeing how she, what things on the court work best for her. I mean, she's quite honestly the most strong, I think, down low on the block when she's, trying to convert, higher percentage buckets. But I think she's a great passer. She can, kind of expand her range a little bit when she needs to. So I think that, as long as she kind of continues to get her teammates involved like she has been and, kind of also relies on maybe shooting a little bit farther away from the basket, she could be getting clamped down low down there as well.
This is her only 3-game stretch of the entire year where she scored single digits. So she's never gone more than 2 games without putting up a double figure in the points column until now. Which again, you're playing the best teams. That makes a lot of sense. But if she can go out there and have a phenomenal game against Texas or TCU coming up on Friday night and say, okay, she's back to form, because you're going to need her if you're going to be playing for a national championship.
It's just amazing to me how, and I might sound like a fan a little bit, but it's amazing to me how Dawn Staley can kind of, tweak the system to, kind of adjust and making sure that, this team is still scoring 50, 60, 70 points a night, even when, your top 2 scorers, starter or coming off the bench, aren't necessarily going to be playing at the level they typically are playing at. So I think just moving the chess pieces around is definitely what has carried this team to their 5th straight Final Four appearance.
Yeah, excited for that. Again, we'll find out who they play between Texas and TCU as they play later on tonight, and they'll take them on either Friday at 7 or Friday at 9 o'clock, and we'll have all that for you on the game when that does end up happening a little bit later on this week. So looking forward to that, but we'll kind of take a look at what's left of this field so far and see how South Carolina stacks up against the teams remaining in the women's tournament. Still got Final Four games to be decided on a little bit later on today. It's coming up next. It is The Extra Point. It's Aaron and Sam Shapiro along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyrod and Sam Shapiro along with you here on your Monday on the Game. Reminder, Gamecock baseball back in action tomorrow night, taking on Presbyterian. Your next chance to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. If Gamecock batter hits a Grand Slam, you could win all the cash in the pot, which goes up by $25 every game. Go to 1075thegame.com and register. The pot currently at $350 for the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Dawn Staley again punching her ticket to her 5th straight Final Four appearance, looking for yet another national championship. In the process, going back-to-back this upcoming weekend. She was asked yesterday after the victory over Duke, does this South Carolina team look like a national championship caliber squad?
Look, I mean, at this point, it's not going to look pretty. Okay, it's not. There are stretches in each game that is not going to look pretty. If you watch all the games, you know, maybe the score at the end of a UConn game is not indicative of how it looked in the first 2 quarters. So some of it's not going to look as smoothly as us coaches and players envision or how we practice. But you certainly have to get down and play the kind of game that's presented in front of you, and we'll do that. You know, if we're not scoring a whole lot of points, then we got to up our defense. If we're scoring a whole lot of points, we got to up our defense. So it is that type of year that, you know, for us, it's not any blowouts. We have to grind for every single win that we can get and manufacture.
And again, we've seen Carolina have their ups and downs this year, but at the end of the day, they're still one of the 4 to 5 best teams in all of women's college basketball and have punched their ticket to another Final Four. And we got a chance to once again have all number 1 seeds be represented if Southern Cal can meet UConn tonight and if Texas can beat TCU. UCLA yesterday, like South Carolina did, punch their ticket by taking down LSU in the process. So we'll have no worse than a 2 seed winning this year's national championship.
That means a recipe for exciting national championship games at least.
Should be. And that's the thing. We'll get into this on the men's side in a minute. We all love upsets. We all love chaos and craziness and Cinderellas and all those kind of things. But when you have too many upsets early on and you knock out the big dogs, you can get some not so great basketball in the last couple of rounds. But we're about to get that here.
It's a tale
for both tournaments.
Yeah, I feel like it's a tale of 2 sides of a coin, I guess. You know, when you have those upsets early on, then I guess the bigger games that mean more, I feel like those teams, then they reality kind of seeps in a little bit and they start to go, oh my gosh, wait, we're on the biggest stage ever. And then they kind of, you know, the gears start turning and they get a little nervous, and then maybe the games don't end up being completely exciting because you have 2 teams that are nervous shooting 13 for 40 from the field. But I feel like when you at least have more exciting team or higher seeded teams, you're at least getting a couple pieces that have been in this seed a couple times before. I mean, for example, when you look at the UCLA LSU game, I mean, you had plenty of pieces from that LSU team, most notably one being Flaw J. Johnson. She had 28 points yesterday. I mean, even though that game was close and UCLA came out on top, she scored 28 points. It's exciting to watch in any college game. So I think having higher seeds, especially, you know, for these big name games, the big title games, it's going to get at least more eyes on the screen for sure.
And I do think it's kind of a bummer that, you know, tonight's matchup between UConn and Southern Cal would be billed as Paige Beckers versus Juju Watkins. Of course, Juju Watkins out with the ACL tear now, so that's obviously not going to happen. UConn comes into this game as a 14.5-point favorite. They have been mauling opponents so far in the NCAA tournament, 103-34 against Arkansas State, 91-57 against South Dakota, and then 82-59 in the Sweet 16 against Oklahoma. 40 points from Paige Beckers in that game. Like, there's a reason they are the favorites right now because they are playing lights out basketball. And look, if Carolina matched up with them on Sunday, they probably would end up being favored as well.
I honestly can't blame you on that, Tyler. They've been playing dominant ball, especially they look like the team that unfortunately Carolina had to face off against in the regular season against every opponent that the Huskies have had to play in this tournament run. So I'm hoping that if we do have to face them in the Natty, they're going to hopefully lose a little bit of steam before that. But right now, it is not looking that way.
The other side of things, of course, South Carolina waiting on the winner of Texas and TCU. That game tips off at 7 o'clock tonight on ESPN for the final of the Region 3 Birmingham third region matchup there. And again, Carolina's played both these teams. They beat TCU in the one game they played them. They've taken 2 out of 3 against Texas, but they're teams that are both familiar with South Carolina. And again, you've got two very good programs, very good coaches on both sides there that, whoever it is has the ability to give South Carolina trouble. And as we've seen through these last 3 games of the tournament, anybody can go up there and give South Carolina an issue. And again, Carolina's been able to make it happen in the late stages of that game, but talented enough teams can make you sweat.
Yeah, and I think when it comes down to, who Carolina is going to have to play, TCU or Texas, I mean, you have kind of just because you played both teams before, they kind of know what things might work and what might not work. But because of how much they've faced Texas just throughout this regular year, I feel like Texas is playing with more of a chip on their shoulder if they're going up against South Carolina. So, I mean, if I'm the Gamecocks, I'm going to want to see TCU in that Final Four matchup.
Yeah, and especially, considering the fact that South Carolina really dominated the last matchup you had against Texas, which was on a neutral floor. Just up the road in Greenville. You feel pretty good about that if you see them for a 4th time. Carolina, I'm trying to go back and see what the score for that game was, but they dispatched of TCU pretty easily, 85-52, a little bit earlier on in the season. But you almost worry that regardless of which team it is, there might be a little bit of a quiet confidence about it, given the fact that you've taken out of the 4 matchups between these 2 teams, taken 3 of those 4, the only exception Texas beating you in their barn out there in Austin. So you obviously don't want to overlook anybody. And I think Dawn, without losing, can look at these past couple of games as things to drive home. Like, hey, you didn't play your best game and you nearly got beat. What are you going to do to make sure you go out there and play your best game against Texas or TCU on Friday night?
And also just, I guess, going back to the drawing board and looking at in those matchups that they did win, what did work, and continuing to go to that in the sense that, Longhorns might not have gone back to the drawing board themselves and worked out those kinks. So if it's not broken, don't fix it yet. But if they prove that it is fixed, then, go to plan B or plan C. But if this Gamecock team has proved one thing this season, it's they are not short of backup plans. That is for sure.
No, they're not. And again, they're deep. And one thing that's been cool about this tournament for South Carolina, and I've asked the question many times of who is the player that's leading the charge here? Because for a lot of teams, again, just look at UConn. Paige Beckers is obviously leading the way there, where you say, yeah, she's definitely like the catalyst for everything happening with that UConn team. But for South Carolina, through the first 4 games of the tournament so far, I can't say you definitively have had one player that's gone out there and done the majority of the heavy lifting. Kitts has shined with double-doubles. Pow Pow in the Indiana game the other week was really huge with her defensive prowess. Fulwiley the other night against Maryland. Obviously, Kitts making some clutch plays down at the end of last night's game, as well as Bree Hall and Sanaya Fagan. You're just kind of a sum of your parts, right? That there is no one superstar on this team, which has kind of been the way it's built this entire year, and maybe that's the ingredient for winning the championship this time around.
Yeah, I think definitely because you have a lot of pretty strong players instead of, like a Paige Beckers or a Juju Watkins or a Caitlin Clark kind of figure, I guess carrying the torch and leading the way. It makes them so versatile, and I mean, you can go to any of them on any given night, and thankfully, the best part about what makes the team work is that nobody has to be the center of attention. I feel like they all genuinely kind of have a good rapport with each other, and, they take care of each other on and off the court. And it was actually funny. I was talking to some fans yesterday. You even heard just like little kids that were watching the game there with their parents just talking about how, they're really a team and, they really work together and they play together. And it's not, kind of just built around, one player or one, specific system or, making one piece of the puzzle kind of shine in comparison to the rest of the formula. So it's really nice to kind of see, not to sound cliche, but like how teams kind of look in the movies where it's the whole team. They very much give that whole team kind of feel to what they're doing.
By the way, did you see Dawn sign the baby yesterday?
I did. That was wild. That was actually wild. We were actually freaking out about that in the newsroom. One of the digital guys actually came up to me. He goes, "Did she just sign a baby's butt?"
She did.
She very much did. Yeah. No. If there's ever going to be a documentary about the Gamecocks, that's got to be in there.
I don't know how I'd handle that situation, to be honest with you. It's a little odd. Now, are you? Because again, it's the baby's wearing the onesie or whatever. Like,
right.
Do you frame that?
Oh yeah.
You certainly. The baby can't wear it again, right?
Maybe. Well, I would if I were the baby. Well, it's not up to the baby. It's up to the baby's parents probably. But if I'm the baby's parents, if there's another national championship, if there's a parade, you are hoisting that baby up like Rafiki's hoisting Simba in The Lion King.
Yeah, maybe you'd break it out just for that.
Just for that.
But
And you got to get a picture with Staley and the baby in the ones.
But other than that, like you're putting it in a shadow box, and I'm assuming never touching it again.
Absolutely, I would never. When I was younger, I got a football, or I had a football signed by Chad Pennington from the New York Jets, and I made the mistake of playing with it all throughout my childhood, and the signature
And
now
it's
is rubbed
gone.
off. Yeah, it's
Yep.
gone.
You got to be careful.
So I should have framed that football.
They say permanent markers. They're not actually as permanent as we think they are.
They're only permanent for so long.
Exactly. We'll jump to the mid side of things coming up next as we have our Final Four for the men's national champ for the men's bracket set after a interesting weekend of college basketball. It's coming up next. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Sam Shapiro along with you on your Monday here in the game.
Who's got the chalk?
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Sam Shapiro along with you. Did you ever watch Chalk Zone as a kid?
I did not,
This
actually.
song? Okay, well, this is from a Nickelodeon cartoon called Chalk Zone from back in the day, the early 2000s. I thought it was apropos because when it comes to the men's basketball tournament, we got chalk. All number one seeds left standing as we head into the Final Four.
We love that. We love that. It's
We
exciting,
do.
Natty.
It's created some really good basketball over these past couple rounds. Again, not as many upsets in the first couple as people would have liked, but again, you get the best teams playing each other in the Elite Eight, Final Four, and obviously national championship. And I'll certainly take that. For our Who Sprung a Leak, brought to you by our friends over at American Leak Detection, it's got to go to Texas Tech, right? Just under 3 minutes to go on Saturday, leading 75-66 over the number one seed in Florida. They get outscored in the final 3 minutes, 18-4, to allow Florida to go back to the Final Four.
Oh, no. Oh, no. And it's
That's
actually what's been really funny is, too, I feel like a lot of people have been sleeping, myself included, a lot of people have been sleeping on this Florida team, especially after that UConn game. So I think, them doing that to Texas Tech really just, it's got to instill a lot of confidence in this team, but hopefully not too much confidence.
Yeah, look, Walter Clinton Jr. played out of his mind, 30 points on Saturday, and this is such an interesting team because they came to Colonial Life Arena and nearly lost. Like South Carolina led that game all the way through, and they lost it in the final, handful of seconds, and Florida went on to win. And we've seen this Florida team, they've lost to Georgia on the road. They've lost to Tennessee, they lost to Kentucky. Like they're not invincible by any means, but when they're playing their best basketball, they are nearly unstoppable. And again, with their backs up against the wall, facing elimination with 3 minutes to go, they went out there and put on a clinic on Saturday.
Yeah, I was going to say, definitely, they picked their moments. They picked the right moments to shine. And at least in the last 3 minutes of what would have been the end of their season, they decided to shine and said, we're going to keep this going a little bit longer. So it's actually funny. If you look at the game on paper, you wouldn't even know.
Yeah, I know. Again, you have to kind of dig in there and see, but that ended up being the difference there. And the game that I think everybody was collectively excited about going into the weekend was Duke and Alabama facing off against each other on Saturday night for the East Region Final. And really, Duke dominated this game, 85-65. And going back to Alabama's Sweet 16 game where they made 25 three-pointers in that contest, at some point you're going to have that. It's going to balance out, right? Like, you don't make 25 three-pointers in one game and then make 22 the next one. Like, you're going to have to pay that back at some point, and they did on Saturday to the tune of 8 of 32 from the three-point line against Duke. Now, Duke, obviously, a really, really good defensive team, forced them into some bad shots there, but, this is where Nate Oates' offensive style of go fast and fling it can come back to bite you. Because when they weren't hitting from three, they didn't have a chance.
Yeah, they didn't have a shot, no pun intended. And Duke also shot 46% from 46 from three, 53% from the field. And when you have 4 of your 5 starters in double figures, I mean, especially when you're playing college ball like that, and 4 of those 5 starters that had double figures, they had 14 or more points. Cooper Flagg not going out there, not needing to score 30, 40 plus, especially, kind of still feel like he's coming off that ankle tweak from the ACC tournament, but it seems like he's got a great supporting cast around him, at least on the scoring front. And now I'm a little bit more confident having them in my national championship game in my bracket.
Yeah, Cooper Flagg, by the way, what a talent, man. He's fun to watch. You don't have to be
whatever
a Duke
NBA
fan.
team is going to get him is.
He's going to be the number 1 pick overall, and you have to see all those intangibles of being able to play at the next level, front and center for what he's done in the tournament so far. You move on to Sunday. Auburn kind of manages the gap against Michigan State, wins that one 70-64. Houston dominates Tennessee 69-50 in that game right there. And you know what's really funny? I feel like Houston's the one team that just hasn't really been talked about at all through this tournament.
Yeah.
Again, they come in as number 1 seed, one of the best teams in the country, but I guess it's just the anticipation of how good they are and the fact that, let me see here, they have, the Purdue game was tight, but for the most part, they've controlled things through the first couple of rounds here, and again, highlighted that with the 19-point win against Tennessee yesterday. I don't want to say that they're not underdogs because of how good they are, but they're just kind of flying under the radar compared to these other 4 top seeds.
Well, I feel like a lot of the time, and I might be wrong, but I do feel like they're usually kind of in the mix, whether it's, somewhere in the Elite Eight or the Final Four, or even, kind of around the national championship. I always feel like they're in the conversation, but I really feel like we don't see them kind of quite get over the hump or get to that national championship game as much. They're always in the conversation, but they're not quite exactly there. If I were to compare them to anything, I'd probably say they were kind of like how the Raptors were in 2018, like 60-plus wins, but it was always just there was always just another force, whether it was Boston or LeBron being on Cleveland. Just there was always another force that people wanted to talk about a little bit more. So even though they were very successful, there was kind of something overshadowing them. And I feel like this is kind of the scenario again here where you have Auburn and Duke and even St. John's coming into the tournament. A lot of people were excited about them, thought they were going to go far, but you make plans, God laughs. So I think maybe that's kind of played into why a lot of people aren't talking about the Houston Cougars.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, maybe people will be talking a little bit about them now, considering that, dominant 19-point win over this weekend.
By the way, Houston, since the start of December, one loss. Lost to Texas Tech at the beginning of February. That was their only loss since the beginning of December. That is how good and dominant they've been, which I think coincides with why they're just not getting talked about as much, because they're just expected to win, which they have been doing. And again, they're hoisting a trophy, come next Monday night. Nobody would be surprised. But I don't know. I'm excited. I think this is going to be a fun Final Four. You're guaranteed to get at least one SEC team in the national championship because Florida and Auburn have to play each other. And that was kind of my mark for the SEC being successful this year. Because, again, this was a year where they were billed as the greatest league, the greatest conference in college basketball history, get 14 teams in the tournament. I said you have to at least have one team playing for the national championship, and you're going to get that no matter what with either Florida or Auburn this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, and the last time this team's gone to the Final Four before this year was 2021. So, I mean, obviously, like I was saying before, always kind of in the mix, but they haven't really gotten this far in the last few years. So I think it is interesting that people are not talking about them, though. I think that is definitely true. I feel like a lot more people were talking about Auburn. People were talking about Michigan State for a while, because I feel like in a bunch of these games, their first half performance wasn't, it didn't necessarily live up to the hype that this team, I guess had going into the tournament. They've had great second half play, which has helped a lot. But then also watching, teams like Tennessee and Alabama fall by almost 20-point margins, sometimes can overshadow success stories. And I think sometimes when a team is just blatantly good and not, like, a lot of people I feel like haven't been talking about UConn as much as they should have been either, at least on the women's side. But, we had just talked about how they've been completely just decimating teams.
You just expect them to do that.
Yeah, and I think when that's kind of the formality in terms of a storyline around a team, that only lasts being excited for so long. So I think maybe some of the other upsets, or Florida's kind of making Texas Tech sprung a leak and all that kind of stuff, maybe have overshadowed it a little bit up to this point.
Well, it's going to be a fun final weekend of college basketball on both the men's and women's side. Any brackets left standing? We'll discuss that coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Sam Shapiro along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyrod, Sam Shapiro along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Reminder, appreciate everybody. Check us out on The Game TV, sponsored by our friends over at Shepherd's Glass and powered by Integrated Media. You can also download the 1075 Game app. Take us with you wherever you go on the iTunes Store or the Google Play Store and listen anywhere. Any of your brackets still alive, Sam? Anything still perfect?
Oh, no, they're gone.
Well, I knew the answer to that question because the last perfect bracket did indeed go down this past weekend. On the women's side of things, they'd gone 54-0 up to that point. Let's see. Lisa VT22, I'm assuming a Virginia Tech fan, had a bracket win the first 54 games, which bested the longest known perfect run of 50-0, the first 50 games right, which was done last season. And then TCU taking down Notre Dame ended up busting her bracket.
I mean, that's got to be probably the farthest run for anybody that's filled out, or one of the farthest runs for anybody that's filled out a women's bracket.
At least on these where you can monitor it on websites like ESPN and CBS and stuff like that. Nobody's gone farther than that.
Huh. Honestly, I can't believe that they made it as far, because even some of those games are harder to pick than, the gauntlet of first-round games. And then if you make it that far to get, the final 4 games correct, I mean, that's got to be – I don't know what would feel worse, like having a bunch of your first-round picks get wrong, or like getting them all right and then getting to the final 4 prediction and then you get that wrong and then your whole thing I don't know what would bother me more.
Yeah, I feel like when you've gotten this far, you're like, okay, all I have to do is get, less than 10 games, right? Like, I've gotten this far, and I just get less than 10 games right, and I don't know, because different sites, you can win money, you can win prizes and stuff like that, and you're on the cusp of winning because I know, like Warren Buffett years ago put up like $1 million. No, was it $1 billion? It might have been $1 billion. For the perfect bracket because of how hard it is.
Yeah, I think it might have been.
Because it was the $1 billion bracket challenge.
Yeah.
And obviously nobody won it. But, think about that. You are, a handful of games away from life-changing money, and then you lose, and you get nothing.
So the year Baylor beat Gonzaga, I was in a tournament bracket, and I remember, a lot of my first-round picks were wrong.
Yeah.
But I had Baylor beating Gonzaga in the national championship game, which is ultimately what happened.
Yes.
So because I did that, I went from 21st to 8th in a day.
Yeah.
And then when they won the game, I went from 8th to 2nd. And the only reason I didn't win was because the person in front of me also had Baylor beating Gonzaga. But literally 7 through 3 all had Zaga winning the game. And that was the team with Drew Timme, Jalen Suggs.
Yeah.
So when Zaga lost, it put me above all those people just because I picked Baylor and they all picked Gonzaga. And I ended up winning $70, which was really nice.
I lost a office pool because Gonzaga lost that game. I, like you, lost a lot of first-round games. And to the point where, I didn't even look at my bracket for a couple days. And then as it got into, the Elite Eight, I'm like, let me just check in. And, I'm in first place. But because we, it came down to 3 of us all near each other that could win the thing. And it was a winner-take-all type deal. And the 2 people behind me picked Baylor. I picked Gonzaga. So the fact that Gonzaga lost means I dropped down to 3rd. I was that close. It was $250 too.
So even if there was a second-place prize, you would have got booted out of that too.
Yeah, there may have been a second-place prize. I don't think there was. But, yeah, regardless, I dropped down to 3rd. And I was that's burned into my memory now because of how that went. Because, again, I didn't really care either way as far as rooting for teams. I'm like, Gonzaga, you can win me some money here. Let's go.
Right. No, I mean, for that's why I say if your bracket's busted, don't lose hope. You might still be able to win your pool. But, I mean, hey, if you pick the national champion, you got a pretty decent shot. You just got to hope a lot of people don't pick the same champion as you.
Well, the men's side of things, the final bracket went down when Kentucky beat Illinois 84-75. So that was last weekend.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's a little easier to pick the women's tournament.
I feel like with the men, there's always a surprise. There's always something new.
Not as many surprises this year.
Whether it's team managers getting NIL deals or, all top seeds making the main games, there's always something new.
It's been a fun tournament. And again, I appreciate the fact that you have your best teams remaining, because that means we're going to get 3 more high-level games this weekend on into next Monday to decide the national championship. So I don't think this is going to be a tournament that we're going to be talking about 5 years from now, like, hey, remember the 2025 tournament? No, but for the moment, it's not bad.
And at least this year has been a lot more exciting to watch than last year, just because I feel like it was UConn and Purdue was all people were really talking about. And, I mean, the women's tournament was a lot more exciting, so that kind of took away from it. But now when you have all these high-level teams, it's been a more exciting tournament to watch this year so far. I'm excited to see how it pans out.
Well, Sam, this time next week, we might be talking about another national championship.
I certainly hope so.
We'll see. That'll do it for the Extra Point. Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. 11 o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you here, wrapping up your month of March, getting set for April, which might just culminate with yet another national championship for Gamecock women's basketball. Still got a couple more games to play, but guys, for the 5th straight year, we're able to say that Dawn Staley is taking a team to the women's Final Four this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, I mean, guys, to finish, like let's break that down literally too. Like, you're one of the last 4 standing, which, you know, for a lot of programs, that's an accomplishment if you just do it. They have done it now 5 years in a row, which the amount of consistency that you have to do that, especially in college athletics where you're going to have a roster that is going to continuously churn. And, you know, they've obviously done a great job of keeping girls within the program. However, of course, you're going to have graduation. You're going to have people moving on. You have people going on to the draft. And to just do it this many times in a row is honestly insane. To not have kind of that let up or that let down somewhere along the way where maybe you were even the better team, but just it's sports. And, you know, I thought yesterday, honestly, great teams will find a way to win games even if they don't have their fastball. And, you know, I didn't think it was their best played game of the year by any means, but they just found a way to go win. And I do think, as there's been a lot of talk about that since the game, I do think we got to give credit to Duke as well. Like, they play great defense. And, you know, people that watched the game saw the graphic pop up. To that point, going into this game, one of the best all-time defenses in tournament history in terms of limiting their opponents. I think it was 38 points a game.
Yeah, nobody had gotten past 50 on them.
Yeah, so, yeah, South Carolina was out of sync at times. It was kind of a grindy, just find a way. This is not going to be pretty. Let's just find a way and escape. And that's exactly what South Carolina did. But credit to Duke, I think that's partially by design. Like, they have a team built to play great defense, and they made South Carolina work for everything. And ultimately, I'm always fascinated to see, as the game flows, who do you lean on with the game on the line? And sometimes it's, hey, Malaysia is on one today. Let's get the ball to her. Sometimes it is let's rely on our experience. And for this game, it was rely on the experience. I was saying, as the game progressed, I was saying, hey, get the ball to Pow Pow, get the ball to Fagan, and then ultimately, as we've seen, Kitts has developed quite a bit of the clutch gene to close out games.
She had the huge drive, you know, late in the game. Really nice move. She had the free throws late in the game. I thought also, Wes, Raven Johnson just gave such a calming presence to this team. That there was a time where South Carolina got, I think it was a steal later in the game. The clock was, you know, the game clock, it was winding down, maybe a couple minutes left. They had an opportunity maybe for a fast break, but she pulled it back, right? Like, she was just, you know, we all know Raven Johnson's not a 30-point-a-game scorer. She's not, you know, Paige Beckers. But what she does for this team is so important, you know, and I thought she played really, really good defense. She really had a calming presence on this team, and I think she did exactly what they needed. I mean, the numbers coming into this game, I think you had a bunch of really good defensive teams. I mean, Duke and UNC in the Sweet 16, they broke the record for fewest combined points in the Sweet 16. That was a 47-38 game. And so you knew coming in, probably points were going to be at a premium. And I thought both teams played really good defense. There are a lot of contested shots in the game. Duke has a great shot blocker on their team. Only, 6 feet tall, but still a great shot blocker. They have the freshman big on their team who can also shoot from outside. So it caused some issues. But at the end of the day, this is kind of a victim of your own success thing. People, you could tell, like, just looking at some of the social media conversation or even on our boards on Gamecock Central, people expect to be in the Final Four, and because they've done it so many times, and it's not something that comes easily at all.
Well, and I think also kind of looking at how these past couple games have played out, we've seen South Carolina face adversity to some degree in all of them. You're down at the half to Indiana. You have to hold off a scrappy Maryland team. Duke outplayed you through the middle portions of that game yesterday. They had a lead entering the fourth quarter, but when it really came down to it, you mentioned a moment ago, Wes, sometimes you're relying on some of your younger players like the Full Wiley's and Edwards to go out there and just be superstars. Sometimes you just got to lean on that veteran experience of Raven Johnson, Sanaya Fagan. Chloe Kitts feels like she's been around forever to end up winning you games, and that's what they did yesterday and end up becoming the difference there of holding Duke to virtually nothing in those last handful of minutes.
Yeah, I thought, like I said, I thought Fagan and Pow Pow both had some huge shots in the second half, and that's the thing about this team. That is, in my opinion, the beauty of this team, but also it puts you in a spot. If you're Dawn Staley, you're having to gather information in real time and figure out, all right, whose day is it? And, those decisions are going to affect the outcome a lot of times. And, I was saying to me, I just thought Fagan and Pow Pow were playing with confidence and not really letting the moment get to them. And then, Kitts, I think, has just developed that killer instinct. Like, she didn't have her best game for much of the day, but just when it was on the line, I mean, to be a big and be able to shoot free throws the way she does, too, to the extent that you're inbounding the ball to her, knowing they have to foul, and saying, this is who we trust to take us to the Final Four. That says a lot. I wish I could have caught what Chloe said to herself. She missed a layup and got fouled, and I caught the end, like they had the camera shot, and it was something Chloe, and it was like she was reprimanding herself, and it was something like make a layup, Chloe, or head in the game. It was something where she was just like, giving herself a little pep talk there. I wish I could have caught what it was. Just a very kind of genuine moment there that was caught on camera. And I mean, and Dawn Staley talked afterwards about the just adult conversation she can have with Chloe Kitts now, who came in early and as we all know, did the whole graduate early thing, and knew she probably wasn't going to play a whole lot her freshman year, which really should have been her senior year in high school, and just has developed both as a player, but also just as a tough-nosed human and an adult and all that stuff too. So very, very fun to see the girls have that success yesterday, especially, like I said, you didn't play your best game. And it is funny how much people grade this team on a completely different standard. Like any other, it reminds me, honestly, the way I used to make fun of Alabama football fans when they were on their stretch of, they're competing and winning every year. And you go to their message boards, and it looks just like a South Carolina message board. Like they're complaining the entire game thread. The O-line sucks. What's going on? Why is this happening? And it's just like you're on a different standard.
You're winning by 3 touchdowns. What are you complaining about?
Yeah, like what other program goes to a final, like advances to a Final Four, and part of the conversation is, I don't know, guys. If we play like that again, we're not going to win next week.
I saw that so many times.
It's like, well, but you won the game, so we'll worry about next week. Next week, you won the game.
UConn made 14 straight from 2008 to 2022.
Yep.
That's absurd.
You booked the hotel before the season.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people do that around here, which shows you, yep. And really it shouldn't be that way, but that's how good it is. It's that looking forward. Well, they got to get better. But every game, like that's what this team does, They answer the call. May not always be pretty. It may not be a blowout, but they've played some really good competition. I mean, we're getting down to the wire where it's really tough. I mean, I think every school who has an opportunity to go win this thing now has been challenged in some form or fashion. I mean, UConn pulled away against, Oklahoma, but early they were down. They didn't just go out there and just steamroll. I don't think we've seen that in any of these games lately. Early rounds, yes, we've seen it. So you're getting down to the wire where it's really, really tough. Everybody left is very capable, but this team, because they can get it done so many different ways, that has really helped them, I think. And they've got a lot of experience, and it can be any given player, any given day.
Yeah, and not to diminish at all what UConn did for that stretch. That obviously, I mean, they owned the sport at that time. But I do think we are seeing the sport produce more talent than ever in terms of, again, we talked about this, maybe not like the 40th team that's in the tournament or something, but more so I would say maybe that top 10 or so, top 12, like those teams, there's more skill, there's more talent among kind of your top teams than there's ever been before. So I think it's more difficult. I mean, Duke had the ball with the shot to take the lead late. Like they're in the game, right? And had, I mean, an outstanding chance to win the game. And I think you just look around and there were teams, the UCLA LSU game, that was highly competitive as well, and LSU was a 3. So I think it's more difficult than ever, and we're seeing that with South Carolina too. Like we're seeing teams kind of rise to their level a little bit, I think, or try to at least.
Well, let's hear from Dawn Staley what she had to say after the game as they head off to Tampa this upcoming weekend, taking on either Texas or TCU, and we'll take a look at what's left of the women's bracket coming up next, as well as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls along here on your Monday on the game. All right.
All right, guys, let me tell you about our friends over at Firehouse Subs. As always, our presenting sponsor here on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Head on over to firehousesubs.com or do what we do, get the Firehouse Subs app. By far, the easiest way you can put in your lunch order, have it waiting for you efficiently on the shelf when you walk in. Of course, we know you already got your favorites if you go to Firehouse Subs, but if you want to try something new, how about the new Zesty Garlic Hook and Ladder or the Spicy Dill Hook and Ladder, both brought to you by Hot Ones, the Hot Ones podcast, where they go on there. Chris, this is the one where they go on there and they have to do the interview while they're eating hot
the
food.
wings, and it progressively
It gets hotter and hotter as we go. So you could, in theory, do that yourself. You could get a Zesty Garlic Hook and Ladder, not very spicy, but very good, and then do the Spicy Dill Hook and Ladder. Pretty spicy, honestly. Whatever you want, hit it up right now, firehousesubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app.
Yes, I did.
I didn't think it would be this good. I'm not gonna lie. This is like something a person would dream of. So, yeah.
I did because all they do is win here. So. Period.
Okay, period.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West Chris along with you on your Monday here on the game. That was Bree Hall and Sanaya Fagan yesterday. Both being asked the question if they foresaw 4 Final Four trips in their South Carolina careers when they came in here all those years ago, and obviously getting set to pursue another national championship coming up this weekend. Don Staley talked after the game about how a game like yesterday, which was a defensive back and forth between them and Duke, prepares them for the Final Four this upcoming weekend.
Well, considering I think we played the Texas or TCU, right? You know, if it's Texas, we're gonna muck it up just like we do in the, you know, in the Southeastern Conference. If it's TCU, much the same because they can score a lot of points. I just hope that we can get our offense going a little bit. We can't seem to play a little bit more fluidly. I thought we played with a lot better pace than we did on Friday. So, I mean, the pace will help some, but, you know, when you have two teams that really defend, it's going to look like that. So, I thought both of us accomplished what we needed to accomplish while trying to get a win.
And look, defense has always been the MO for a Don Staley-led team. These past couple of years, they've opened things up a little bit more offensively. But as we saw yesterday, when it really comes down to you need to clamp things down and win the game, defense always ends up coming up in the clutch, and that's exactly what South Carolina did yesterday. And whether it is Texas or TCU or whoever they end up with facing in a potential national championship game, defense is going to be very important.
Yeah, and I think at this point, man, you got teams that are pretty complete as well. Like, you look at what UConn is doing, you look at what Paige Beckers is doing in terms of scoring the basketball. Each team you face is going to present a unique challenge. And I thought, you know, you look at Duke and, you know, they put a lot of athleticism on the court, it seemed like, and really just have played great defense throughout the entire tournament. So for Carolina, you knew every bucket was going to be hard to come by. And I think they just, for the most part, a game they didn't hit all their shots or didn't hit at a high clip. At the end, they were able to do so, and they also were able to continue to play their own brand of defense. So I think the thing that separates South Carolina is that they can win a game that gets mucked up, as Dawn put it, but also they can win a game at times if they get somebody hot where it's kind of a little bit more of a track meet and back and forth and stuff like that. So at this point of the thing, though, you're going to have to play pretty well, I think, on both sides. Like, you're not going to be able to just, you know, just win one way. Like, you're going to have to be ready to play on both sides.
The thing that struck me throughout the game, and, you know, it wasn't a surprise that points came at a premium. You know, we knew both of these defenses, I think, were going to clamp down. Actually, you know, I could say probably every week I regret my pick for certain things. But, you know, I picked South Carolina in the game in a relatively close game. But I want to say I had them either in the 60s or very low 70s, and that was a pretty bad pick when you really think about it. But, you know, it was really hard to get good shots. I mean, the whole notion to go back to the last game with Brenda Fries from Maryland saying that, you know, they had the blueprint. I mean, that really was kind of silly for a bunch of reasons. I mean, South Carolina has lost a few games this year. So the teams that beat them, I would say, that actually beat them, not hypothetically could have beaten them, probably had a better blueprint. And as Dawn has pointed out, it's not much different than what other teams have done in the past, right? And we saw Duke do some of that. They did kind of flood the zone when Fagan would get the ball in the post or when Kitts would get the ball. They were blitzing and doubling some, and that does make it tough to pass out of that. We saw some turnovers out of that. We saw some bad shots taken. But Duke also did a really good job of not just leaving girls wide open for three-pointers, right? I mean, the Gamecocks only even attempted 8 threes in the entire game. The other side, Duke shot 17, and not all of those were good shots. Some of them were, some of them weren't. That ended up being a huge difference in the game. If they shoot a little bit better, this could be a different story. But I do think South Carolina's ability to shoot the three didn't show through in this game, but they've got Pow. Kits can make them sometimes. They've got Tessa. They've got Full Wiley. That is something that we haven't seen as much in the past couple games that I do think they have in their back pocket.
Well, and that's something interesting about this team. And look, every team that's left standing has at least one superstar player on it. South Carolina seems to be a little bit different. And when you look through the first 4 games of the tournament so far, they've had a different leading scorer in every single game. You obviously saw, Joyce Edwards go off for a bunch of points in the first game against Tennessee Tech. Full Wiley was a big reason why they won the other night. She had 23 points against Maryland in the Sweet 16, and both of Edwards and Full Wiley were relatively quiet yesterday. They combined for 9 points, but it's the other members of the team in that starting five that ended up being so clutch yesterday. And you obviously saw, another great game from Chloe Kitts, great game defensively from Sanaya Fagan, Bree Hall. Like, it's different players stepping up in each game, which we talk about the depth that South Carolina has, going back to recruiting and the portal and all that kind of stuff. These are the times when it shines the most. This is why, among other things, South Carolina is so good in these tournament settings, because it's not just 1 or 2 players that lead the charge. It's the entire team and different ones stepping up at different times.
Yeah, for sure. And like we talked about on the top, sometimes it's the older players, sometimes it's the younger ones, sometimes it's a combination. I always looked at, like, Dawn Staley has a lot of levers she can pull in terms of defeating a given opponent based on the matchups. And, I think one thing we've seen this year compared to last year is there is no Camila Cardoso. And I think when Carolina got in trouble last year, they could sort of encourage her to take over a little bit more. I think at times she was completely okay with letting the rest of her teammates shine a little bit. But at times they had to say, look, Camila, it's go time. Go take over this game. And we saw that time and time again. That, to me, is where this team is a little bit different, a little bit more susceptible to losing a game, and a little bit more susceptible going into the Final Four to somebody upsetting them. But, I think all in all, anytime you get to the Final Four, you're happy. And really, and we'll see what the other 2 teams are that get there. But anybody's got a chance to win this thing this year. I truly believe that.
Who do y'all think is the most, that's a good segue into my next question, most dangerous team aside from South Carolina? And I agree with you, they are all, like, if you fast forward and then we look back and you say so-and-so, like TCU won the national title, and be like, okay, I believe that.
Yeah, sure, makes sense.
But who do y'all think is the biggest
I think UConn, the way Paige Beckers is playing.
That's my pick.
It's hard to argue against that. She has been playing on a different level so far in the tournament so far. Again, we know what they did to South Carolina here a couple months ago. Best defense in the entire nation. That would be, a rematch in the national championship game with perhaps 2 of the biggest brands in college basketball as of right now. It'll be probably a thrilling game, probably another low-scoring, grinded out type of affair. And UConn might actually be favored in that. They're a 15-point favorite tonight, taking on Southern Cal. I know Juju Watkins isn't there, obviously, but they've been heavily favored in all their games so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we sit right now, they probably would be favored just by Vegas odds. I mean, last I checked, they were favored to win the entire thing. So I think if they matched up and knowing what happened last time, not that Vegas cares much about that, but they probably would be the Vegas favorite. And, if you're South Carolina, we won't get too far ahead, but this team or this program has been pretty darn good in revenge type games. They don't really get very many opportunities for revenge games because they just don't lose games. And that would be, I wouldn't say perhaps 2 of, I would say that would be the 2 biggest brands, both in terms of like long-term UConn and then in terms of the last, 10 years, last 8 to 9 years. You're talking about the brand that has pretty much owned women's basketball.
2 brands that have met on this stage several times before already.
Yes.
Yeah,
100%.
Definitely some juicy games coming up tonight, though. Texas TCU tonight, 7, and then Southern Cal UConn right after it at 9. Yep. And then the bracket will be set.
We'll know they'll play either Friday at 7 or Friday at 9 o'clock, and national championship coming up on Sunday at 3, and see if they can go back-to-back and win 3 out of the last 5. So we'll see what happens. We'll talk more about that as the week rolls along. We'll dive into baseball coming up next because it was not as fun of a weekend on the diamond out at Founders Park as the women were having on the court out there in Birmingham. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris on your Monday here on the game.
If you have ever had any issues at your home with Wi-Fi, don't worry, you're not alone. Most people have. I know I have at my home. Wes, you have too. And we've had integrated media come out to our home to take care of it. Many times, issues with today's Wi-Fi can be caused by things like an old router, an old modem, an aging Wi-Fi network, or not having the right best service provider, not being up to today's demanding standards. Let Integrated Media be your Wi-Fi experts. They can come out, they can test your Wi-Fi during a free in-home consultation. They'll check out your hardware. They'll run speed tests, not in just one location, but all around your home. And they can even advise you on the best service provider for your area. And make sure you're not overpaying every month. 803-948-8327. They can recommend, sell, and install the very best Wi-Fi equipment for 2025. They can even help you out with Starlink if you're on the outskirts of the Midlands. 803-948-8327.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris with you on your Monday, recapping the weekend that was in Gamecock sports. Unfortunately for baseball, another tough 3-game stretch as they drop all 3 to the number 1 team in the country and defending national champions in the Tennessee Volunteers. Coach Maneri, after the game, talked about the effort through all 3 games over the weekend.
I was really, really proud of our team the first 2 games, the way they fought and scratched and clawed and really competed. Today was a little bit different. Every guy in our lineup had a hit. Every single guy in our lineup had at least 1 hit. But we left 11 runners on base, and we had 2 RBI singles. And you're just not going to beat a team like Tennessee when you only score 2 runs. So obviously we didn't come through in a lot of clutch situations. We had a lot of opportunities. We had the right guys up at the plate, and it just didn't happen for us today. And then we hit into 3 double plays. We only struck out 5 times. Sometimes I would rather see us strike out than take defensive swings where we just hit ground balls, weak ground balls. But it just wasn't our day today. I don't think we pitched horrible. We didn't play bad defense. I don't think we made an error. Everybody got a hit, but somehow, we got beat by 5 runs. So, there's just another gear that you got to put it in to be able to beat a really good team. Somebody's got to do something extraordinary on your team. You got to have somebody driving 4 or 5 runs. You got to have a pitcher that does something really outstanding. And we just didn't, we didn't have that today.
Whether it's, and then clearly a frustrated Coach Maneri there, whether it was Carry-On's error early on in game number 1 that ended up allowing a lot of runs across the plate, and the batters after that, Stone doesn't come in or comes in and doesn't have a great performance in game number 2 and allows Tennessee to get away there. And then, like you said, you just couldn't drive guys in on Sunday, and only scoring 2 runs against Tennessee is not going to get the job done. And here we are once again coming away from another weekend frustrated as South Carolina dips to 1-8 in conference play and 1-12 against ranked opponents so far this season.
Yeah, and I mean, let me also just say, guys, Tennessee, they are legit. That is a team with very few weaknesses. I knew they could swing the bats. I know that's what they're known for. But you look at game 2, which was right there for the taking for South Carolina. Not only did Tennessee get clutch hits in terms of home runs, but, man, they made some great defensive plays. Not just playing your position and making the easy plays, but the shortstop, that play he made in the hole on a Scobie hit in the 6th hole where he backhands it and throws to third to cut off the lead run. I think that was game 2. Would have, I believe, put Carolina up or extended the lead. I don't remember what, but what's his name? Antigua. That dude is elite defensively. They made several other big time plays defensively. A lot of times when you see a team built on, hey, they're going to hit 1 million home runs this year, you give something up elsewhere. I don't know if I see that with Tennessee. They hit, they pitch, they play defense. They are, I really hate to say it, they are the model right now. Good Lord. Carolina obviously just is not that right now. Nothing about this weekend was really particularly surprising.
That's the frustrating part, I think, for fans. There was a stretch, obviously, where South Carolina was the model in college baseball. And since that time period, the team hasn't been back to Omaha. Now, they've been close in some instances. But now you're looking at the frustration of Tennessee coming in, which, again, not that long ago, flip it around, they weren't very good. And so people are looking around going, all right, the SEC has gotten more and more competitive. We can say this for so many sports, right? We can say it for football. We can say it for basketball, women's basketball, not just in the SEC, but just in college in general, as you were just talking about earlier, Wes, is super competitive. And I think there's a sense for fans of, are we kind of falling behind the 8 ball? And certainly for this year, the answer is yes. And you can't argue with the fact that South Carolina has not been back to Omaha since 2013. Again, I think you're going more to this season is what it is. There's still more season left to play. You don't expect great things the rest of the season based on what you've seen so far, because this team has some real problems. And I realize they just played Tennessee, who, as you said, Wes, is the model. They played Clemson. They played really, really good competition. But so far, there are some concerning things. They're, yes, they got a lot of hits. They had 34 total hits, but Jack Veltri noted on Gamecock Central just 3 homers, 3 doubles. You had a defensive miscue that eventually, wheels came off. You give up 5 runs. You're hitting into more double plays than anybody in the league. Like, those things have been problems. And so, how do you turn it around ultimately is, people are thinking about that short term. I think they're thinking about it more long term.
Well, and Coach Maneri several times, go back to coming off last weekend's series and mentioning it yesterday as well, it just doesn't seem like he has the talent that he thinks is going to be able to compete in the SEC as of right now. And he's mentioned several times, man, this league is tougher than it was when I left only about 4 years ago. And obviously a lot's changed since then in the landscape of college sports, but I think he may have come into South Carolina with an idea of what the SEC was going to be, only to realize in the midst of it, where again, you have what you have. You can't exactly go out there and make trades and stuff like that to get players in midseason. You got to roll with it. And unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like they have what they need to be able to compete with the best of the best. You're going to get some reprieve coming up the next couple weeks against Mississippi State and Texas A&M, but those games are on the road. And that's obviously tough when you're going to any venue, even though those two teams are like South Carolina, only 1-8 in conference play. And again, if you can't manage to win those 2 series, that's kind of it for you, it seems like.
Yeah, and we talked about this last week. I wonder if Maneri was a little bit surprised by just how much talent there is around this league. And, he, in his comments on, I think it was Friday, pretty much confirmed as much. And he's had to walk the line very, very carefully about not throwing his team under the bus and saying, look, we know, everybody knows the record right now, right? And we're not quitting on this season. And the frustrating thing is Carolina actually Friday and Saturday played 2 pretty good games. It was just, like I said, Tennessee is just built different right now. And, you look at this stretch of games, it's a little bit more than your, hey, the SEC is great. This has been not just great competition, but elite competition, and you really haven't had much luck to go your way on top of it. You've had, the weirdest injury I've ever heard. A guy gets hit in the head warming up, and then, re-injures his oblique while getting hit in the head. Like, I've never heard of that in my life. And so then what does that do? That takes your guy in Jarvis Evans, who's pitched very well for you on the midweek, and you would have liked to get some length out of him and give you a shot against North Carolina. You hit the ball against North Carolina in the midweek, but you had to run your entire pitching staff out there. And so I don't know. It's just it is what it is at this point. You have to keep trying to you're kind of at the point of battling for pride and then trying to – baseball's a weird, streaky game. Here's the question. Can they keep it on the tracks enough? Can you keep playing? Like I said, I thought they actually played, and I think Maneri thought so too, played decent baseball on Friday and Saturday. If you can do that against a top 25 team as opposed to a top 3 team,
yep.
What does that look like? Can you get a little bit of momentum going? And, again, baseball snowballs in both directions. If everything's going against you, then it's just very hard to win. If you can get a little bit of confidence and start having some things go your way, sometimes you'll be surprised with the results. And, all you can do now is just, as I'm sure Maneri would tell them, as he always says, we're going to be men about this, keep playing, and see what happens. But Tennessee, they're going to Omaha again.
Yeah. If looking like the favorites once again.
Yeah.
You can't just say that this South Carolina team, like the record is ugly, but you can't look at them and say they've been non-competitive. They were quite competitive all weekend. They were very competitive, and the series they got swept against Clemson. But you don't want to look back and say, man, if this, if that. That's what we had to do with basketball, right?
Yep.
You look look at the Final Four. Look at the Elite Eight in the NCAA men's tournament. And you go, South Carolina almost beat that team. They led against that team for all but 8 seconds, et cetera, but they didn't make these plays. At some point, you got to start making those plays. And while the schedule is not going to get any easier, You're not playing Tennessee every weekend. You're not playing Arkansas on the road every weekend. You're not even playing Clemson every weekend. Can some of these things start going your way? And if you want to be pessimistic, you say, no, it's not. But it is baseball. It's possible. And so while a lot of people have already moved on to the long term, there's still a season to play. Let's see what happens.
They'll be back in action tomorrow night, taking on Presbyterian. 6:15 pregame, 6:30 first pitch in a game that Monero described as a Game 7 as South Carolina looks to end its losing streak and get things back on track for taking on Mississippi State this upcoming weekend. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris on your Monday here in the game. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris along with you for a few more minutes, wrapping things up here on your Monday. Of course, the men's Final Four is set. All the number one seeds still standing as they head off this weekend to crown a national champion. But Lamont Paris and the men's basketball team here locally already hard at work on building next year's team. Of course, the portal opened up a week ago, and they're already securing commitments out of it from this past weekend in the form of Trayson Eaglestaff from North Dakota and Christ Essendoko from Providence, the first two commitments for South Carolina this weekend.
Yeah, I was looking forward to seeing how you were going with that.
That's Priest. Is it?
You got to choose the direction.
Okay, well.
Hey, I respect you just jumped.
You just
dived
rolled
in
with
it.
it.
I figured that was one I didn't need the phonetics for, but Christ, okay.
Christ,
all right.
Yes.
He's from France, so.
He is.
Right.
I was calling him Christ before I was corrected.
Again, I didn't think I needed to seek something out on the pronunciation of that one. Maybe the last name, but Christ.
Yeah, I actually can't help you on the last name. You sounded great on it.
I said Essendoko. I'm going to roll with that.
Yeah, I'm going to roll with that as well. I think so. The pickup of Trayson Eaglestaff is kind of the big splashy. People that follow this stuff in the portal quickly were like, all right, this dude is a big name portal guy. Gonzaga is involved. Kentucky's involved. Kansas is involved. And just kind of a splashy get for Paris and company. I look at Essendoko. I think this is an important pickup for them as well. The message there was, hey, we need you to be the big man who also has some touch, who can extend out, who can shoot the three ball. And, I've noticed a lot of people who are looking at what happened at Providence. He's averaged 4.3 points, 3.9 rebounds this past season, and they're going, okay, what am I missing here? And even he transferred from St. Joseph's to Providence last year, and I talked to the kid on Saturday, and basically he's out with something to prove that, like, last year was not, paraphrasing here, last year was not who he is. You go back to what he did as a freshman, 8.2 points a game, 5.7 rebounds a game, and hit 36.8% from three-point land as a 7-footer. So I think when South Carolina is recruiting him, that's the Essendoko they're wanting to put on the floor. Somebody, as we've seen with their offense, they value somebody who can be a big but then can also extend out and open things up inside.
Yeah, there is that style, right? Like you look back last year, BJ Mack, who was kind of a unicorn as a player, like just a strange sounds bad as a word, but like he was a unique player. He was kind of a below the rim big who was tough inside, could rebound, could score around the basket, but then could step out and be a presence shooting the three. And they didn't really have that last year because Colin Murray-Boyles, even though he can, from what we've heard, shoot, he didn't do a lot of it in games. And so adding that element to the offense is something that, it's clear they wanted. So you don't have to, you can go back and you can do kind of the stat check recently and all that stuff. But you can see if you go study his career and his skill set, you can kind of see that he's got some tools to work with. And Eaglestaff, man, he can score.
Yeah.
Big time scorer.
Yeah.
Top 5 in the Summit League in points as well as three-pointers made. So big gets for South Carolina, hopefully that pan out as good players here when the next season does roll around. That is going to do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show. Myself, Terry Ford, up next here on your Monday on the Game.
All right, guys, before we get out of here, let me tell you about our good friends over at Classic Roofing. Head on over to classicroofingsc.com or give them a call today, 803-590-7870. If you go to that website, you can click the free estimate button and fill out a quick survey. And what they're going to do after they get your information, they're going to come out and check out your roof and let you know, hey, are there any problem areas right now? Are there some things maybe we can go ahead and fix to take care of bigger problems later on? And then maybe even most importantly, they're going to let you know how much life you have left on that roof so you can go ahead and plan for the future of it. Of course, if you own a home or you own a business, the roof is one of the most important aspects. It's going to require some effort, some work on your part, but our friends at Classic Roofing, they are there to help you and take a huge sort of just pressure off your shoulders. So hit them up right now, classicroofingsc.com. And again, that phone number, 803-590-7870.